We have Dr. Uttam Kumar Sinha, Research Fellow IDSA. Recently, IDSA delegation visited Arctic region, Norway, and the delegation also visited to Arctic Council, Toronto, Arctic Council Secretary, Toronto, and delegation was consist of Dr. Uttam Kumar Sinha and Director General IDSA. He is not here, but he was also supposed to give some brief on the subject. But we have the expert on the subject, Dr. Uttam Kumar Sinha. So without taking much more time, now I would like to request Dr. Uttam Kumar Sinha, please give a brief over to you.
Thank you and good morning. I'll keep it brief, though the Arctic itself has a lot of issues to deal with. But I will just explain some of the significant changes that are happening and what kind of impact it will have. Policy for us as well as the larger geostrategic changes. I'll also for about 5 minutes touch upon the conference we're doing later this month, 23rd, 24th September. This was our second visit to the Arctic region. Now anything above the 66.5 degree is the Arctic region. So last year we were up at the 70 degree north latitude. So obviously it's kind of had a little effect on our mind. Each time you go up, they say there's a slight change in your thinking. It's the Saman principle of getting excited but not getting too frenzied. So some of the analysis that have emerged from the visit has a bit of an alarmist perspective, because climate change is based on a lot of alarm-based analysis so that it can initiate some policy level action. But it's not manufactured, because some of the IPCC findings that will emerge and some of the leaks have already happened, if you might have seen in some of the media reports, probably suggest that things are really bad. And if you look at the Arctic and the changes that have happened in the last 10 years, it's quite clear that in the next 50 to 60 years hence, we are in for a severe global warming problem. Now if you look at the May estimates by NASA from the Mauna Loa Observatory, that is the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, the ppm, parts per million, it has crossed the 400. Very significant scientifically, but hardly touched by the media. Simply because much of these consequences and impacts are 50 years, 60 years, 70 years hence. And in the political sphere and in the policy making sphere of 5 years, it doesn't really have an impact. So these issues tend to get ignored. And policies are not about our future generation. That's a very holistic, nice way of looking at policy. Policies are all about immediate 5 years to 7 years. And that's what the life of a policy maker and a politician is. So to think about 50 years, 60 years, 70 years hence, and to incorporate those things into our policy making is realistic. It's idealistic, I think. It's not realistic. So that's one of the conundrums of climate change and the evidences that we keep getting. The evidences are clear, but it's more in the future, and therefore the immediate action is very limited. The second finding that we got to understand and also probably see a bit, especially in the Barents, was that there is a thinning of ice, and there's obviously the ice in the summertime has really shrunk, which of course has created new routes and new passages, which is of course entirely a different political story thereon. But things have changed and it's quite visible. The problem is, and the fear is, and one of the greatest fear of the climate change is the sea level rise. Now if the ice melts in the Arctic, simple science tells us that the sea level doesn't really rise. I mean, if you put an ice cube in a glass of water, there is no significant rise, even if the ice melts. But the problem is that if Greenland, the ice on the landmass melts, or if the ice on Antarctica melts, then probably you will see a significant level of sea rise. And that will not impact only the Scandinavian countries up there, but probably will have more impact on countries like Bangladesh. So Arctic is no longer an isolated region. It's not the remoteness of ice that attracts us anymore, and some odd expeditionary exercises that we have done. There is actually a significant link, and that link we need to understand, fear, and incorporate in our policies. The second significant finding is that temperature has increased. 2 degrees and above, that's the kind of changes that have happened in the Arctic, and it has significantly changed the ecosystem around it. The Arctic is just not about the melting of the ice. It's also the impact on the larger ecosystem and the biodiversity and the indigenous people who live and incorporate themselves into that ecosystem. So the changes are going to be significant there. But more so from our perspective and from the scientific, atmospheric, climatological, glaciological perspective, those changes over there in the Arctic will have some bearing on the monsoon pattern in Asia. So there is therefore a scientific connect, and therefore Arctic cannot be seen just purely as a national geographical kind of a setting. The third bit is that we are now diplomatically an observer in the Arctic Council, and this came about in the May meeting. The Arctic Council meeting decided that a large number of Asian countries should be observers in the Council. I'll talk a bit about what the Council is, because that's where we have to play a role. China, Japan, South Korea, Singapore, along with India, were given the observer status. Italy too, from the European country. So we have now an Asian kind of a perspective in the Arctic Council. So that again means Arctic is no longer distant from the larger politics of Asia. The Chinese, of course, are very much interested. Arctic is much nearer to them than probably for India. They have concerns and opportunities about the routes that they will traverse as the ice melts. Obviously, in terms of economics, in terms of the days that a shipping route can take from China to Rotterdam would be significantly much more advantageous for us, for the Chinese, than, for example, India. India will still follow the Suez Canal route in terms of the cost-benefit analysis. But for Japan, China and South Korea, the route that they will take via the Arctic Ocean will significantly be advantageous, and therefore they will concentrate commercially on that route, and it is of great importance for them. So probably we'll find their role in the Arctic Council much more loud, probably at times forceful. So what would be India's approach to the Council? Now, Council is not the UN Security Council kind of a thing. It's probably like a society of IDSA. You discuss a few issues, you form working groups, you do task force reports. You just try to highlight some of the concerns, and those concerns are not geopolitical in nature. You won't find the word security or politics mentioned in the preamble of the Arctic Council. So it's a bit of a misnomer, the Council and the 5 big countries like Russia, America and Canada kind of dictating the geopolitical terms. It's not. It's a very soft body based on cooperation, coordination, interaction, and a lot of scientific endeavors. That's the whole idea of the Council. So you have about 6 working groups. You engage and indulge yourself in those working groups. You can raise certain issues, and you can bring in a body of the epistemic community, the scientists, researchers, bring them into that kind of working group, raise the concern, but you have to bring in a clinical scientific finding. There's no wishy-washy kind of analysis that goes on. It is purely based on scientific inferences. And that's how you approach the Council. And India has been good at this because we've done our polar research quite well. We have our institutions well in place in Goa and the earth sciences here. There's a lot of traction, research traction between the Norwegian institutions and the Indian scientific institutions, especially the Oceanographic Research Center in Goa, which actually houses the polar expeditions in the Antarctic and now in the Arctic. So they will get a lot of visibility, and there will be a lot of to and fro movement between researchers there. So I think we will be more engaged in the scientific, polar kind of research, the glaciological research. Is important for us because the impact and the changes that are happening in that is almost similar to what is happening in the Himalayan glaciers. And it's quite clear that the Himalayan glaciers and the melting of the glaciers, and the science is not complete there, as the IPCC showed in 2007. We need more evidences about the glacial changes. But any change in the glacier in the Himalayas will obviously impact the flow of the rivers. And when that impacts the flow of the rivers, obviously the political strains will be quite witnessed because the transboundary rivers are quite clearly defined and shared in the region. So I've often said that the Himalayan watershed is the new enterprise for us. I don't look at South Asia politically anymore. I look at it as a scientific endeavor where we need to bring in a collective body of understanding, scientific evidences, expertise, technologies to understand these changes. And we might foo-foo climate change as a future impact and not more in the immediate, but we cannot forget that policies have to also be made for future generations. And that's something that often comes about when you speak to these scientists in the council. Very quickly, about 2-3 minutes, very quickly on the 23rd, 24th September conference. This is part of our research endeavor. We have been closely now collaborating with Norwegian research institutes, and not only PRIO, we moved more into the the polar institutes like the Fritjof Nansen, and we are doing this collaborative exercise, basically an Asian perspective. What would the Chinese think about the Arctic? How would Japan view its observer status now? And so we are getting researchers from China, Japan, South Korea, 3 important Asian countries. We have our own perspective, the Indian perspective. We're also trying to now link it not only, we look at it geopolitically from a foreign policy perspective, that's what our domain is. But as I said, Arctic cannot be just seen from a geopolitical lens. We have to have a greater understanding of the scientific changes that are happening, because that will help our larger reading of the Arctic. And therefore we are engaging now with the Earth Science Ministry, and we're getting a few people from them to understand what is happening. People from Goa, the National Center for Oceanography and Research, we'll get a few from them. We'll have our own few people from the MEA to give a perspective of how now India would engage. Would they have so-called an Arctic diplomat? Or probably they'll have to start thinking, where would they place Arctic, in which desk, something. But I think IDSA has taken a lead in this research. And we've, I think, created a bit of an impression in the policy circle. And I think we need to carry this forward.